We were talking in the first hour about this process of recruitment. And we talked about how we would actually go about the recruitment process. But I'd like to spend just a few moments talking about the difference between promotion from within and bringing someone in from the environment to fill a role, and the impact that it has on the motivation of the whole organization. Promotion from within, I think, is the ideal, as long as your planning processes have gotten to the point where you do have someone within that you can promote. Now, there's always going to be someone, like my other son, who feels that he's very competent and can fulfill that role, but he's really not there yet. He still needs a little bit more maturity. And anyway, no, that's not talking bad about him, but he may not be quite ready for that role. Excuse me. And so, as a manager, we really need to help those individuals being prepared for that role. So, as we talked about motivation, then we're going to see the ability to grow within the organization. And that growth is going to be a motivating factor. But when that whole organization is turned upside down by bringing someone in from outside, what we're shouting loud and clear to our employees is, you don't matter, because I'm going to bring someone in from the outside who can do the job so much better than you. And so that's going to be a situation where it's a very negative aspect for the employee. Now, I say that in terms of general statement rather than forever and always it will be that way. Because there will be situations where you've got to bring someone in from the outside because you haven't prepared. The individual has not developed to the extent that you're really looking for at this point. So, it probably is not the point, is a point in opposition to the employee saying, you are not ready. It is a problem with the manager saying, I haven't spent the time with you in helping you to develop. And so in terms of a task list for the manager, I really would like to see almost at the top the responsibility of developing the employees. That's not just training them, but really helping them to develop technical skills, human skills, and conceptual skills. And that is what I'm trying to do for each one of you in these 2 weeks in this class, is to help you to develop the technical skills of management as well as the conceptual skills of seeing the entire picture and being able to make appropriate decisions associated with it. The human resource management, or the human skills necessary, we're talking about today in terms of human resource management, but probably not enough time to develop those skills. Those skills are probably already developed or are developing well within you. But we still need to work on developing skills, human skills, to our highest level as possible. So, I'm thinking, I don't know of any situation other than one where I brought someone in from the outside in terms of a promotion. But what it was, I guess I created a position, and there was no one in our department that would have fulfilled that position. So I recruited, and so this was someone that was coming in from the very, at the very bottom, and is growing successfully, and that is our chef, our executive chef, who is teaching in our department and is also working on a master's degree. And so his master's degree will be done soon, and then after that is done, this will give him an opportunity then to really continue to grow at a much faster rate than he is right now, because he's spending much of his time in school. So this was a situation in which we brought someone in from the outside, but I did not keep someone down within the organization because they weren't qualified. So I hope that you can say something like that as you get through your career. Okay, so now we have recruited. We have a set of individuals whose applications we like. There's evidence that they are going to do a good job for us in the organization. But now we've got to go through the process of real selection. And so we're going to look at the application. We're going to look at comments that were made by the individual in human resource management that did the screening of these applicants. We're going to check the background. We talked about that just a little bit earlier, but get as much as possible from the individual that they have given as a reference. One way that you can get more information is by developing a network of professionals that are equal to you. Be involved in professional associations. Be involved in continuing education events that are happening beyond what the professional organization is doing. Get to know fellow food service managers. Gain their confidence, gain their trust. And there is a communications flow that all you need to do is listen, and you will pick up where they will talk about this individual is leaving. I sure am glad they left. Or, I'm really sad to see them leave, and I hope that, they do progress upward and can develop the skills that they really want. So checking the background is really essential. Then in the interviewing process, that is where you have an opportunity to really get to know that individual. Is it possible to get to know someone in 30 minutes? No. How long, if you are married, how long were you courted by your spouse? 30 minutes? 3 days? I've heard stories of people who have proposed marriage at the first date. They really don't know what they're getting involved in. And the amount of time that you are going to spend with that employee is even more time than you spend with your spouse. So it's a very important decision that you're making. And so it's not something that is going to be done very rapidly. It's got to be done thoroughly and take the amount of time that is necessary. Then what you're doing is going through that decision-making process that we talked about yesterday, looking at all of the alternatives. We set up criteria for the decision. Well, that is our job description, and that's our job specification. And so we're going to see how well each of our alternatives fit that criterion, or that set of criteria. So what specifically can we do? One thing that we can do is ask questions just to get to know the person. What's your background? What kind of work have you been involved in? But then we need to look at the other side and show me what you can do in terms of direct examples of work that's going to be done. I remember one time I was interviewing for a special events cook. No, a special events manager. And one of the questions that I asked her was, we're planning a special event for Thursday evening. What's the menu? I asked her to plan a menu for that event. And based upon the menu, That sold me. She did a fantastic job with the menu. She did a very excellent job as a special events manager for a number of years. And then we've talked about the physical exam to make certain that the individual is fulfilling the requirements of the job specification. So the questions we're going to ask are based upon the job description, upon the requirements of the job in terms of the task, but we're also looking for an individual who fits our qualifications, who is a good fit in our organization, someone who is supportive, who knows the organization, can respond positively to answers to individuals calling on the telephone or sending emails, whatever. They're just going to be a perfect individual representing the department that you have. And then what is their competence? Do they have the skills and abilities to really do the job? What I would like to do now for a few minutes is to prepare a list of interview questions that you could use in interviewing for a food service manager is what I had planned. I think maybe I'll stay with that, but work with you on this other. But I'd like for you, maybe just as a group, and you can do this in Romanian if you want, but I want a full, as complete a list as possible of the kinds of questions that you would ask an applicant. Have any of you ever been interviewed for a job? I'm sure that many of you have. So that's a good place to begin as to the kinds of questions that would be asked. But we're specifically looking at a food service manager. Manager is part of the title. So one of the things that I would like to look at is what are their management skills? And so you can ask that question in terms of a scenario that you would pose to them and say, how would you solve it? So I'm looking for that kind of thing as well, not just the initial kinds of questions, but some real in-depth analysis of that individual's qualifications to do the job. Okay? So I would expect that we would take maybe 20 minutes or more to do this. I'm not going to rush you, because what I want to have when we're done is a list that you can take with you that would be helpful to you in the future when you are interviewing applicants. You're going to have to change the questions somewhat depending upon the job, but having at least this set of questions would be helpful to you in knowing how to change them for the specific job that you have. Actually, what I like to do is to have a set of questions for every job classification. So I would have one for cooks, I would have one for people who are working with patient trays, I'd have another one for a dietitian, another one for purchaser, because each of those are going to be different, but they all have a unique skill that we need to find out their ability to do that skill. Okay? Any questions? Understand? Okay. So I will let you pick a leader and circle up and make as complete a list as possible. Okay? So I have not quite 5 minutes till 5, so about 5:15 or so. And if you need more time, you got it. All right. I would like to have you interview me.
Please take a seat.
Okay, I'll take a seat. Thank you.
I need help. So, please tell me, why you are here? Why did you apply for this job?
I have just moved into the area and I'm trying to establish myself in this area, and so I was excited when I saw your advertisement that there was an opening, and so I said, that looks like a good place to work, and so that's why I applied.
You have worked in this, on a similar job elsewhere?
I have 12 years of experience with greater and greater responsibility as the years have gone on in terms of being a food service director, and I have had 3 jobs as food service director, first at a very small hospital, and then I was able to move to a larger hospital, and then one that's just a little bit smaller than the one that we have here.
So what did you like most on your last job?
What did I like most? I think working with people was the thing that I really enjoyed the most, as well as seeing the satisfaction of the customers in terms of the food that we served. I thought we did an excellent job in planning of the menu, and it was representative of what the customers wanted, and so as a result of that, there was a great deal of satisfaction, and that brought satisfaction to me.
May I ask you what you didn't like?
What I didn't like? Oh, probably the thing that I did not like the most is the politics, all the little communications that's going on that are not official but are just tend to occupy time and not really help us to achieve our goals. But you have politics in every organization, so I don't expect that is not present here in this organization, but that's the thing that probably gets me down the most.
You got a lot of laugh during the interview, I'm sorry, but I think you have some expectation from our organization on this particular job. Can you tell us? Tell me, sorry. Can you tell me some of your expectations?
Well, I think the greatest expectation that I have is that I would be hired. But I would hope also that the rate of pay would be in line with the amount of experience that I've had and what I've been able to clearly demonstrate in previous positions, and so we'll see how that goes.
So the payment is important for you?
Pay is important, but it's not the most important thing. Something that I think may be a little bit more important is interaction with people, interaction with the customer, as I've indicated before. But just, I think a lot of it is going to depend upon me and the kind of culture that I establish in this organization as the food service director, and to create a position or an option for employees to feel that they can advance, that they can grow, and that they're going to be happy continuing to work here in this organization.
So I can see a lot of people. For your family, you have a big family?
I have my wife and 3 small children, and family life is important as well, so I'm not looking for a job that I'm going to marry and be involved in 18 to 20 hours a day, but I will put in the amount of time necessary, particularly at the beginning, to make certain that the organization, our department, is run well, and that use that time to train employees that, in terms of the way that I think is important as we meet with customers.
So our program during the day is important for you, like you said. You won't be able to stay 10 or 12 hours if something happens.
That's what I expect. That's what I have done in the past.
So if a situation like this will occur, what will you do to manage it? If something happens and you have to stay 3 or 4 hours or more to arrange
Oh,
to do something.
that's no. The important thing is customer service, and if there's an issue with that, you know, that's not the norm. It's the abnormal situation, and you know, we've got to stay with that until it's resolved. No, I mean, that's not an issue at all. I mean,
Usually when a problem occurs, you like to manage it by yourself, or you like to involve the whole team of yours.
I think one of the real responsibilities of a food service director is to develop a team. And this team is going to work together to do what is necessary. I would expect that I would maintain the authority and responsibility and accountability to do the job, but that is going to be shared with the rest of the team. So the other members of the team are going to be the people involved in food production, food service aspects of it, patient service, and I think we'll be very successful in what we do.
You know, at this particular moment, what is the best price for tomatoes, for example, where you can
The
find
best,
it?
where I can find the best price?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what I would do is to use the internet and do a search to find out what the costs of the tomatoes are. I would not go running from store to store finding it out, but that information should be available on the internet, and I have skill in finding answers that I need to have answered on the internet.
Maybe a last one. If you want to have an initiative and you want to convince your chef to do a new recipe, you're not for sure about it, but you've heard about it can be cost efficient, it can be, you taste it somewhere else and it's very good. How you will do this to convince your chef to do it?
I think I would begin by establishing an environment for all of the employees that we're not going to be happy with the way things are right now, that we're going to progress. And I think that I might involve all of the employees in bringing in recipes that they really, really like, and I will do my part as well in bringing in some recipes. This is the one that I really want to see added. And I would definitely have the chef bring in recipes, not maybe just one, but a whole set of recipes that I would give him time to develop those recipes and give him recognition of the fact that he developed those recipes, and you know, those are his, and he's and that is, you know, where he gets some recognition as well. Do I get the job?
I will think about that. Let you know. I just talk with them.
Okay. Okay.
So you are looking for the best answers to my question?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You have a story prepared. Okay.
Now, you know, whether I believed it or not, one of the things I was trying to do was to tell you what you wanted to hear. And that is a problem that you get in doing interviews. And that's one of the advantages of doing a series of interviews rather than just one interview. Are there any other questions that you would ask?
Series of interviews with different people, or with the same people, or the same person, or
I didn't understand the first part. I'm sorry.
Serious. You said that's why it's good to do a series of interviews.
Yeah.
The same person or with
Mm-hmm.
different?
Same person. What I would do is I would go through all of the applicants, interview them, take notes on all of the responses that they have given, look at those then that really stand out, and bring those that stand out in for the interview. Not all 6 of them again, but it's a process of cleaning them and just looking at the very, very best. And as a result of that, I think you can come up with the very, very best. It's sometimes helpful to ask questions that are not being expected. Questions that are just off the wall. Where in the world did you come up with that question? Well, that was a good example. That was really, really good.
What?
The tomato
The
example.
tomato.
Yeah. Dr. Dan and I were talking while you all were talking about a set of interview questions as well. And one that I have seen used before is, how do you use a paper clip? One of the things that I'm... One of the things that I'm concerned about is the organizational skills of the individual. Does the applicant use the paperclip to organize themselves? Or is their desk going to be like mine, where it's stacked full of papers and...
If he or she will answer, I don't use the paper clip, it's a bad answer. What's that?
It's probably neither good nor bad, but I would certainly follow up with a question in terms of, how do you keep yourself organized? Or something along that line of organization. I thought that you all did a good job in terms of some of the social questions. I term them social questions in terms of, what is valuable to me in terms of family, but what is my ability to deal with obnoxious people? Do you know that word? People that are difficult to get along with. They're difficult to live with. So how do I deal with that or how would the applicant deal with that, I think would be another area that you might want to consider. But I thought that probably the biggest area that was missing from your list were specific questions that would be taken from that list of tasks. There was nothing about qualifications, and then there was nothing about my ability to manage, giving examples of things that I have done. And probably an appropriate one would be, you have managed, like you're managing a special event and everything goes wrong. What do you do in that situation? I mean, that's the... didn't...
Run away.
Yeah. Indeed.
Exercise.
So, how willing is the applicant to admit failure, and how well did they recover from that failure? Because, you really have no option but to be successful in this. And, I have done some special events where we tried we did a new salad. Our vendor had pears that were canned, but they were whole pears. The core had been taken out. And so what we thought we would do is to stuff it with some a mixture of cranberries and walnuts and raisins and things like that. Put it in there and then put it into a gelatin mold, and so it would be not a cube but a rectangle with this pear inside. That sound like a good presentation? It wasn't.
No.
It was a failure from the very beginning. We did not start making it soon enough. We were using a vegetable gelatin rather than an animal-based gelatin. And so it did not set up very well. And so when we served it, that gelatin just moved right off, and it was very, very bad. So we pulled off the pear and put it on a bed of lettuce and served it that way. No one knew the difference until we told them. But that was fun. That was fun. But what you want to do is to take that job description and look at every task and ask a question about the applicant's ability to do that task. So the amount of time that this interview is going to take is not going to be 30 minutes. Oh, yes. I would allow at least an hour and a half for each of the 6 candidates. So that is 6, and half of 6 is 9. That's 9 hours of interviewing that I've got to do. Not all on the same day, spread over several days, because you do have to go home. And we're going to talk a little bit about the cost of labor turnover. And so one of the elements of the cost of labor turnover is the amount of time that you're spending in interviewing. So just that initial interview is going to be 9 hours. And so at your rate of pay, how much money is that? It's a significant amount of money. But then you're not even started yet, because you've got to bring back those better applicants, and I'm going to spend probably 3 or more hours with them. So that's another 9 hours. So that's 18 hours I've spent already. Now, I'm not dealing here with a entry-level position. Entry-level position I could do in a much shorter time. I just want to make certain that they have the ability to learn and to remember what they have learned. But when you're dealing with a top-level person, you've got to really spend significant time with that person to really get to know them, so that there are no surprises later on. You don't have to ask about every task, but if we were dealing with a food service director, I would really like to know about their ability, again, to plan a menu or to plan a special event. I would maybe put it more into that realm than just planning a menu, but looking at all of, how would you go about doing the staffing for it, what the menu would be. I would ask some questions in terms of what are some of your quality standards. So don't try to get through this interview quickly. It's going to take a bit of time. And then I think that once I got to the point where I pretty well made the decision, because it becomes very, very clear that this is the right person for the job, I would spend more time one-on-one with that person. And this is where I think that I would bring them into the department and let them meet the employees, have them being in the department for a day or so, and interact with everyone. Just seeing what kind of personality they have. A personality trait that I don't particularly care for is someone that I would refer to as a know-it-all. Do you know what I mean? I already know whatever it is, and you really can't tell me anything because I've already done it. I don't particularly care for that kind of a person. But I can work with them, but at the same time I see that there is a limit because they are tied to what they already know. They're not willing to expand. That's a generalization. I understand that, and there's not always that way, but it's an issue that we've got to deal with at times, I think. Was that helpful in terms of coming up with a list and evaluating that list so that you're going to find the very, very best person? Just like we said, in finding a spouse, you're not going to do that in 30 minutes or even in one day. You're going to look at it over an extended period of time. So don't be afraid to spend the time. And I think that's important. Okay, we have finally decided who we're going to hire. And we have put them through the process of the physical exam, the drug test, and they have accepted the position. The next role that we've got to talk about for them in this whole activity now of putting them into the culture of the organization. Every organization has a special culture. And so you just can't take the culture that you've had previously and put it down into the new culture and expect things to be the same. So whenever a new employee comes, a new director comes, for example, that individual has to take their own values and put them into the values of the organization. And it's the values of the organization that must take priority rather than the individual's values. So probably I would begin talking about the values of the organization during the pre-employment interview. And I would talk with them about how they would fit into that culture. Is that parallel to their thinking, or is it in opposition to their thinking? And if it is, how are they going to make that adjustment? How adjustable is that person to change? And since we're talking about change, how willing is that new individual to institute change within the organization? The other part of the orientation would be going through an employee handbook. The handbook is going to represent all of the do's and don'ts within the organization. These are the things that we do, this is the way that we do it, and these are things that we don't do. We don't take personal telephone calls while you're working. That's an example of a no-no. But it too is going to help to bring this individual into the culture of the organization. I would also talk in this orientation, this general orientation, about the benefits that you enjoy by working here. We're going to talk about benefits in a little while. And so you need to use these benefits in a very positive way to entice the employee to come and then to stay. That's one of the reasons that we have the large number of benefits. Then I think it's important that the Chief Executive Officer of the organization be involved in this orientation as well. Specifically, what we're looking for here is an opportunity for the president or whatever the individual is called, what their title is, to really share with the new employees the vision that he or she has for the future of this organization. There's another reason I think that the CEO needs to be involved, and that is the CEO sometimes walks the halls. And this new person is going to be walking the halls as well. So I think it's important that they know who the chief executive officer is so that they will treat them appropriately. I think, it would not be good to encounter the CEO and say inappropriate words or things that may mark you as an individual that is short-term in this organization. But that doesn't happen very often, but what does happen is that I think it's important that a chief executive officer really know the people he's working with him. And to know them by their first name. I have that feeling, I think, with the president of our university. I mean, he's Dick and I'm Bert. I mean, it's all first name. There's no Dr. Hart or Dr. Connell. It's just Dick and Bert. And that's the way it is with my supervisor. It's not Dr. Jackson, it's Craig. And so, it's a very nice, comfortable environment in which to work. And that's what I hope that happens for you as well. And I think it's quite important. So we have brought the employee into the job. Now we really need to begin some serious training. Remember, we have spent much time in the interview process knowing what the skills and abilities of the person are. But what we need to do in our training, I think, is to build on their strengths. To make that individual to the very best director, very best cook, very best employee that we can possibly have. And so part of this training is going to be an orientation to the department. What is our role? What are special things about our department that the new individual needs to know? What is our history? What are the values that we have as a department? This is going to be different than what the organization as a whole will have. And then introduction to coworkers. Hopefully they've met a lot of them before, but this would be an opportunity to really get to know them in socializing that new employee. Sometimes I have seen organizations that will have a welcome reception for a new individual. And that's a good way to get them incorporated into the social structure of the organization. Once they have been working, one day is the time to begin performance assessment. Appraisal of their performance. How are they doing? And I think it's important, beginning with the first day, to give feedback. You really did a good job on this. I'd like to see this change made here. And if and only if we do that, it's going to make, I think, a major difference in our organization. Because when we really sit down to do a performance appraisal, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, the first one will really be done at the end of the probationary period in making the decisions to permanently hire or to terminate. And in that performance appraisal, I have a very strong feeling that nothing should be brought up in that performance appraisal that has not already been talked with the employee. Because the purpose of the performance appraisal is to assess the degree of growth and development that that employee has had. It is not an opportunity to open the gates of heaven to say how bad you are. We need to do that every day. This is an area that I would like to see some improvement. You have really shown some great improvement in this area. But at the end of that probationary period, when that assessment is done, this is a real opportunity for assessment of the pattern of behavior on the job of that individual. It's not time to bring up every bad thing that you can possibly think of, because that should have been done before. And likewise with positive things. I would review the positive things that we've already talked about, not bringing up new ones. So no surprises. Now, in terms of bringing up some new positive things, probably not a problem. But in terms of things that need to be improved, that is not the place to bring it up in the performance appraisal. Any agreement with that, or is that one of my quirks that I should not do? But the performance appraisal is really going to be very similar to that interview that we did in hiring. In terms of looking at the performance, these are the things that you are going to be doing in the job. Now we're going to say these are the things that you are doing in the job. How are you doing with that? The performance appraisal should be standardized. That every employee in that work group, like cooks or tray personnel, would be evaluated using the same criterion, not a difference. And so you are evaluating everyone in the same way. But in order to do appropriate performance appraisal, there's got to be continuous open communication. And that's what I'm really talking about before you go home in the day, that you give feedback to your employees about things they've done well and things that they've done poorly. Now, you don't need to give feedback to everybody if there's nothing that has happened that is negative. And I would not give feedback, positive feedback to every employee every day unless I felt they really needed it. So I need to get to know my employees to the extent that how often they need to have this feedback. But I want them to be able to use that feedback for growth. And then I would like to do another thing in the performance appraisal, and that is evaluate how well we have achieved previous goals that were set in previous assessments that have been done of their performance. In the first one, we probably would not have an opportunity to do that. The first one being the one at probation, at the end of probation. But I would use that time, particularly on this first one, if I've decided to keep that individual, is to help them to see the future and to set some goals as to what we can accomplish in the next 3 months or 6 months or a year. And in doing that, the individual, in my opinion, is going to see, there's a role for me here. I can be can have a very important part of what is happening. And so it's going to be a motivating influence for them rather than just a hygiene factor. So I think we've already talked about that we're going to review the performance. We're not going to bring up new issues, but we're going to review progress in meeting desired job performance. And again, we're not going to have any surprises. In doing so, in following these suggestions, I think that it makes the process of performance evaluation easier on management, and I think that it makes it easier on the employee. Have any of you ever been evaluated before by a supervisor? Is it a positive event, or is it something you don't look forward to? I always have felt that I really didn't look forward to it. It's not something that I like. But when, together with my supervisor, I have set some goals I have worked to achieve those goals, and we're going to talk about how well I achieve them. It's going to be an opportunity to really show that it's been a very positive experience rather than a negative experience. Because we put all the negative in the days in which they happened. And then we will talk about it in the evaluation. But again, I don't expect anything new. And I think that's important. Okay. So use the performance evaluation to express appreciation to that individual as well. Again, creating that positive environment within the organization. Probably the most important thing here is identification of strengths and weaknesses, building on the strengths as we talked about yesterday, and the most important then is developing plans for improvement of the employee. How can we help them to develop over the next few years? And so we monitor that. We document those plans so that as we have opportunities to implement those plans, that we just don't forget them. And the employee says, he really doesn't care. And we don't want that to occur. Do we need to take a break? I think so. I can't believe that it's almost 6 o'clock. I think time goes faster in Romania. And that's good. So 5 minutes after 6, and we'll finish up about 10 minutes to 7 or before. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about discipline, because that's one of the things that we're going to be responsible for, is creating an environment where the employees will be in discipline. We need to have a little language study here for a moment. What is the meaning of discipline? I'm sorry?
Pay attention.
Pay attention? That's part of it, I think. I think that would be
Follow some rules.
Following the rules. Okay. I like that too. But where does punishment come in? I'm going to discipline you. And so you're going to go sit in the corner or whatever. No.
This is not for us.
Discipline, as I look at it, is very much the process of bringing behavior of a child, of an employee, into line with what the expectations are. That you can take a child into any environment and they're going to maintain a very disciplined approach, a very, I won't necessarily say calm, but they are well managed. They represent the family well. They represent the department well. And so I think that one of the responsibilities that we have as a food service manager is to develop the discipline of the employees. But we often use the term discipline in a negative sense, in terms of correcting behavior in a negative way, with not necessarily a switching or a paddling, but in terms of withholding some favor from them. And so, in terms of discipline, I think the approach that we should take is what I refer to as the hot stove approach. What happens when you touch a hot stove?
Suffering.
You get burned, yes. Now, is it a sometimes event? Sometimes you can touch the stove and it doesn't burn you, and sometimes it does. And I'm referring to a stove that is red hot. And so you put your hand on it, and sometimes you're burned and sometimes you're not. No, it is always. So it's consistent. And that's an important part in terms of discipline. Consistency. And with children, I think we know that we've got to be consistent in our discipline. Employees are no different. We're all children. The other thing is that when you put your hand on that stove, it's immediate. It doesn't happen 2 or 3 hours later. It happens right now. And so as a result of that, when we see behavior that is inappropriate, we don't wait till the end of the day. We do it right now. And finally, are there some people that can come and put their hand on the stove and not get burned? Never. But others of us put our hand on the stove and we're immediately burned. Well, maybe the director of the department puts a hand on the stove. They will get burned just like that entry-level employee. If the president of the company comes and put his hand on the stove, he's going to get burned. And so discipline applies to everyone. It's consistent, it's immediate, and hopefully it's effective. But let's talk about some of the ways in which we can do discipline. Whenever there is a situation in which we have an individual or a situation that does not follow our guidelines, our policy, our handbook, we need to begin the process of discipline. And the first one is a written oral documentation. Now, isn't that just a little strange? A written oral? We talk with one another about, in orientation and training, we indicated that this is something that should not happen, and it has happened. And so I would ask for your cooperation in next time, doing it the way that we do it in this organization. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to document in my file that I talked to you on the 29th of February at 6:05 p.m. about this situation. And if your behavior is consistent and that it doesn't happen again, that written documentation is nothing's going to happen. But if it continues, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk with you again, orally, but I'm going to also give you a written letter of reprimand that is going to go into your file. I'm going to give you a copy, and I'm going to ask again for your cooperation. If I'm going to go back just a millimeter or so. In that written documentation and in that oral conversation that we have, I believe it's important to say that if this happens again, this is what's going to happen, so that you've always communicated what the next step is going to be. This too is going to remove some of the surprise in this progressive discipline process. The next step is, if it happens again, I'm going to write a very serious letter to you. I'm going to still talk to you, but I'm going to write a serious letter saying, you still are not meeting this requirement. Excuse me. And so, as a result of that, if it happens again, I am going to give you a suspension. And I'm going to give you 1 day off, and what I want you to do is to think about what you have done and see if it is that you can bring your life into order so that it doesn't happen again. And so I would put that in the written letter. And so if it does happen again, the employee knows exactly what's going to happen. So it is not something that you're imposing upon the employee, but the employee has chosen to follow this pathway. And so as they know they're going to get caught, and so they're going to have a suspension. This may be with or without pay. Typically without pay, but you can pay them if you want. And so you may do this for 2, 3, 4 times, in which you give an ever-increasing severe suspension. And then at some point, your patience is going to run dry. And you're going to put into that letter of reprimand, giving the fact that you're going to suspend them, but to say next time it happens, you will terminate yourself. A lot of managers don't like to terminate employees. I don't like to terminate employees. But in this situation, I have clearly told the employee that if it happens again, that they have terminated themselves. I haven't done anything. It's their behavior, not mine. All I'm doing is following up with what I said that I would do. I'm going to be consistent as well. So, document what is happening. The written letter is critical to get this suspension and termination so that it will stick. I would encourage you to work with Human Resource Management Department in this situation, particularly in the later stages, so that they will support you. There's nothing worse than terminating an employee and then they come back and said, well, you didn't do this right and you didn't do that right. And so Human Resource Management says, give them the job back. Who's in charge now? The employee is, of course, yes. So you don't want to be in that position. This is my favorite topic. We can talk about pay. Compensation management. We'll not talk very long. Your pay is dependent upon your job description. So what is the job title? What are the duties that are included in the job description? And we need to do a survey, and there are organizations that will do that for us, of a survey of individuals who have similar job titles and similar tasks, and finding out what they are paid. And this is going to be a factor as well in determining what the pay is going to be in this organization. And then collective bargaining. If there is a labor union involved, that too may affect the pay that is given in our operation. So these are factors that are going to determine how much we are paid. Now, is there legislation in Romania saying that employees will be paid a minimum wage? Okay. How much is it? No? 700 lei per month. Okay, all right. Not a lot, but there is something there. Is there payment for overtime? So if you work more than 8 hours a day or...
Depends.
Okay, so it's not legislated across the... Excuse me. If you lose your job, is there any payment? You lose your job because you've been told that the job no longer exists, not that you have been fired. Is there pay for that? It depends, okay. Depends on what?
You are paying with some, I don't know,
Yeah.
the number.
It's a small amount, though. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is there payment for injury? If you've been injured on the job, is there pay? Okay. So these are legislated aspects of your pay that you've got to pay irrespective of whether the person is working or not. I have had employees who have been injured on the job. That injury did not seem serious to me, but that was the last day of work that individual ever had. Because they got payment for injury on the job, and as long as the physician would say that they are unable to work, they will continue to get that unemployment pay. Not unemployment, disability pay. And so they got disability pay for years and years until the point at which they could retire. And the pay that they got was full wages. It was not just a portion. And so creating an environment of safety, thank you, is important because it's very costly to us. Now, benefits are another part of payment. Are there any required benefits that you have in Romania? Such as retirement? Do they have to, are you paid something, or is retirement coming from the country? So you have to provide it yourself. So the employer does not pay anything at all?
The employer.
Okay, the employer, and then the employee can also participate in that if they wish, or is it mandated?
No, it's not.
Okay, so, but again, it's not very much money, but there is a little bit of money that would be available for retirement. And then there are, retirement and disability insurance are the only two benefits that are required in the United States. The others are employer decided. If they want to give sick leave, vacation time, all of these other benefits are not required. Are vacation time required? I doubt it. It's just given to you. Sick time, holidays, those are, again, benefits that are given by the employer. And the purpose of the benefit is to, first of all, attract highly qualified staff. They're not going to look just at the rate of pay, but they're going to look at the value of the benefit. And then once they're there, is to keep those employees so that they are fully functional and productive. Do you have any idea what the cost of benefits is? It's going to vary according to those that are given, but within an organization, for every unit of money earned, benefits typically are somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40% of that. So benefits are a very expensive aspect of compensation. So we've got to consider that very carefully when we say we're going to give this additional benefit. So one benefit that is going to be critical for you, for me, is planning for retirement. And so you've got to look at the amount of money that is going to be available to you at that point at which you retire. The way in which retirement is funded is in two separate but distinct ways. One is a defined benefit, and the situation is that if you work for this organization for 40 years, let's say, at the end of that, I will guarantee that you will earn so many lei, so many dollars, so many of what. So you can bank on that. You can be confident that you will get that amount of money. Typically what happens then, as you get older, you've retired, and you start getting this money, then when you die, there is no money that goes to your heirs. That money stays in the bank and is used to pay other people. Our arrangement is that I was going to pay you, as long as you lived. But when you're done, That's it. Now, the defined contribution is different, and when it says that I will put aside into an account with your name on it a certain amount of money. 3%, 4%, 6% of what you earn. It's going to go into a retirement fund. You do not have access to it, but it is yours. You can manage it. You can say to whom, how do you want the money invested? And then upon your retirement, you have access to that money. And then upon your death, your heirs get that money. And so I really, really like the concept of a defined contribution, because that money is going to stay in the family rather than not being available if it's needed. We talked yesterday about the management role of staffing. I want to talk just for a moment about what is involved in staffing. And that is determining the number of employees that we need. And I think this is going to be the last topic that we're going to talk about this afternoon. But our role then is to determine what number of employees we need. And so this is going to be full-time staff, part-time staff, and contingent or on-call employees. And these are the same kind of employees that we were talking about earlier in terms of helping them to develop so they can assume a full-time position later on. And so staffing levels is something that is of interest to a number of people. How many staff do you need for a fast food restaurant? Now, it says 9.3. Well, there are no units there. Is that 9.3 people? Is it 9.3 positions? It doesn't say, and I need to look in the book. Can you take a look in chapter 12, toward the end in staffing, and see what the units are? Thank you.
What is the difference between people and positions? It's not the same thing.
What this is really is the number of meals per labor hour. This is a productivity factor, but I don't think that really is stated in the chapter. And so in a fast food restaurant, we would expect to serve 9.3 meals for every labor hour worked. In a fine dining restaurant, on the other hand, 1.4 meals for every labor hour. A considerable difference. In a family restaurant, about half of what we get in a fast food restaurant, but quite a bit more than what we have in a fine dining restaurant at 4.8. In a cafeteria, 5.5. In an acute care facility like a hospital, 3.5 meals for every labor hour. It's just a little bit beyond that. And then in an extended care facility, about 5 meals per labor hour. And in a school, 13 to 15 labor hours per meal. So this is one indication of the number of staff that we need. So you give me the number of meals that are going to be served, and I can tell you what the staffing needs to be to do that, based upon these averages. Now, I would like to go through a little calculation with you that I think is rather important. You're right in the area, but sorry, my photographic memory didn't develop anything.
I'm looking for a table?
It's a table, yeah. Mm-hmm. In chapter 12. Yeah. I think it is. No, that's not it. But it's in that area. Nevertheless, The question I want to help us to understand is, for every position that we have, how many full-time equivalents do we need? That's exactly it. Meals per labor hour. Yeah, thank you. So if we have one position, and by that I mean like a cook's position, and we want to calculate how many FTE employees it's going to take. Do you know FTE? Is that a term that you're familiar with? Full-time employee or full-time equivalent. And so a full-time employee is going to work 40 hours in a week, going to work 8 hours in a day. So how many people do we need to fill a position that operates 5 days a week? How many people do we need for 6 days a week or 7 days a week? So what we can do then is to look at each of these options. So we're going to say that one FTE works 40 hours in a week. That's our definition. And so if we work 5 days a week, we're going to work 5 times 8 hours or 40 hours. And so we're going to take the number of hours worked by the number of hours that an employee would work. In this case, it's both 40. Do the division, and we come up with 1 FTE. Now, that's not an astounding number, I don't think. I hope not. But if we are going to operate 6 days a week, that means we're going to operate 48 hours. That job is going to work 48 hours rather than 40. And we're going to divide that 48 hours by 40, which is the amount of time that one person would work. And so we get 1.2. So this says that for every position that is going to be filled on a 6 days a week basis, we need 1.2 FTE just to fulfill that task. And then if we're going to operate every day of the week, we're going to operate 56 hours. That is 7 times 8. We're going to divide that by 40. And so we come up with 1.4 FTE that are going to be required. That's almost 1.5 people is going to be required to continue that task 7 days a week. That's a significant amount, I think. Then the other question that I would like to ask pursuing that is, what impact does vacation, sick time, holidays have upon the FTEs required per position? Well, it's going to first of all depend upon the number of vacation days that you are given, the number of holidays that you're given, the amount of sick time that you're given. And so we look at it in terms of a percentage of total hours or total days. Either way would work. And so we look at that percentage and we multiply that 1.4 that we had for a 7-day operation. And in our environment, we need approximately 1.56 FTE for every position that we have. If we're going to cover that position day in and day out, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So that is more than 1.5 employees for every position that we have. So that's another way of looking at staffing and the number of employees that you need. Just a word or two about several other issues in terms of human resource management. Number one is control of overtime. In many environments, overtime is paid at time and a half. So if you are working over what is normally expected, you will get time and a half pay. I got that feeling that's not always here in Romania, maybe not ever in Romania, but in other places in the world that does happen. And so we need to control that excessive expense that we have. Overtime is a penalty that an employer pays for not staffing correctly. What would be the difference if rather than having an employee work overtime, that we call in someone who is on call to do that job. We're going to pay them straight time. They're not going to get overtime for doing that. And in doing so, we have saved some money. And so that gives support to my feeling that we need to have a set of employees who are available, who are on call, who can do the job. The other thing that we need to look at is labor turnover rate. What is the degree of turnover that we see within an organization? If we have high turnover, that is going to give a lot of opportunity for individuals who have just come in to climb this career ladder that we have within the organization. And if we don't have a high turnover, that means that people are going to be fairly stagnant and they're not going to be able to advance. And labor turnover rate is highly affected by the economic conditions. So when economic conditions are good, people then feel more free to leave employment and get another job where they're going up the career ladder, and that's going to give opportunity then for people who remain within the organization to grow and to accept promotion. Labor turnover rates should be probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% a year. That is going to allow for good growth in terms of opportunities for employees. But we've got to understand that there is a cost associated with labor turnover as well. Cost of labor turnover is rather excessive. We've been talking about that all afternoon, but we just haven't put a dollar value in it. Probably the closest point at which we got to putting a dollar value is the amount of time that you are putting in and interviewing those applicants. And that can be significant. Some research that I did a number of years ago, and I think is still valid, is looking at the labor turnover rate associated with various levels within an organization. For an entry-level position, the cost of labor turnover was approximately 1 month's pay. In terms of a middle part of the organization, like a cook, it was more like a 6-month cost. So the amount of money that they earned in 6 months would be the cost of the labor turnover. And then at a professional level person, the cost associated there was over a year. 1 year's wage was the cost of that labor turnover. And that's excessive. So we really need to pay attention to what our labor turnover rate is and to do our best to control it. One of the reasons that people will leave a position is they don't like the policies, they don't like some of those hygiene factors that we were talking about yesterday. And we can correct some of those hygiene factors. And so we can differentiate between those who are leaving that we could have controlled and those that we have no control over. So it's the controlled turnover rate that is really of value to us. And so we take the total number of people who have terminated and subtract from that those that left and there was nothing that we could do about it. You know, a spouse was moving, they graduated and have taken another job or whatever. We can't control that. But we need to pay attention to those employees who left because of something that we did or something that we did not do, something that we could do something about. 1 or 2 words about alternative work schedules. Do you have alternative work schedules? Do you know what I'm talking about? In some operations, you will be at work at 6 a.m. and you will work until 3 p.m. If you're not here, we're going to do progressive discipline and we're going to make you be here. In alternate work schedules, the situation is you can come to work when you want to. We just ask that you be here between the hours of 10 and 2. Because in those hours, everyone will be here and we can interact with the people that we need. Otherwise, at 2 o'clock, you can go home. If you have come at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock. And so you work 8 hours, but you have to be there within that core time of 10 to 2 or whatever is stated. It's not always that. My youngest son works in that kind of environment. It's a great opportunity. My other son works in an office that has no vacation, no sick time, no holiday time, nothing. You can take it off. As long as your work is done and no one is put at a disadvantage because you're not there, you can take the time off. So there's no given amount of vacation, holiday, and sick time that you can have. So that's probably the ultimate in terms of an alternate work schedule. He's pretty good at being to work on time and making certain that he gets all of his work done. But that can be a motivating factor in bringing people into your organization. The last thing I would like to look at, and I think we can do this relatively quickly, is to answer a question, how many staff do I really need to do a task? Because that is, I asked the question the other day, how many patients can one dietitian deal with? Well, you can't deal with that right now. You don't have that information. But this is a methodology that we can use to calculate the standard time to do a job. Many industries have these standard times established. The food service industry is particularly poor at doing this. And we really need to do this so that we are more appropriately staffing than what we have done before. So, a standard time to do a task. Did I indicate what the task was? Making a salad, I think, is what this one is. So this is a salad for 150 people, and we're going to observe with a stopwatch the amount of time that it takes an employee to do that job. And we're going to use individuals who regularly do the job, who are skilled at doing the job, and so there's nothing new about the job that they're looking at. We're going to determine the normal time for the task based upon an evaluation of the observer. Now, okay, and so the normal time is looked at as to the degree that the employee is really involved in their job. I'm going to go to the next slide because I think that it will give us a better examination or look at what is happening here. So the standard time to prepare a salad is that the regular employees are timed. We do it 3 different times, and we take the average of those 3 different times. So we're going to take the sum of observation 1 plus observation 2 plus observation 3 and divide it by 3. And so the time that we've had was 70 minutes the first time, 80 minutes the second time, and 66 minutes the third time. So the sum of that is 216 minutes. We divide that by 3, and so the average time is 72 minutes that it's going to take to do the job. So the average time again is 72 minutes. Now we need to calculate what the normal time is. And this is a subjective evaluation that is made by an industrial engineer, an individual who has been trained in this methodology. And they evaluate the amount of effort that the employees are putting into the job. And one of the things that happens when people are evaluated, you have a person come up. Sorry about that. You have a person come up with a notebook and with a clock, and they stand over you. And they watch what you're doing. You feel comfortable?
No.
No. how do you behave? How do you act in that situation? Do you work harder? You work faster? Or do you work slower? It depends. Yeah. It depends upon the individual.
Try to do your best.
I'm sorry?
You try to do your best.
Yeah, you're trying to do your best, but there is some peer pressure in there too. If the employees know what's happening, they will slow down. They will be like molasses in doing their job. And so the industrial engineer is going to say, ooh, they're only working at 70% of their capacity because of the slowness. But we've evaluated that these employees are working at 110%. They're working faster than what they really should be working. They can't keep that rate of speed all day long. They're not going to be making salads all day long, but assuming that they were, they cannot work that fast all day long. So the employees were working harder than expected. So the normal time is going to equal 110% of the 72 minutes. And so the normal time then is 110 or 1.1 times 72 or 117.2 minutes. That's almost 2 hours. And so we'll use 117 minutes for our calculation. Now the other thing that we need to look at in calculating our standard time, we've calculated the normal time, but we're going to divide it by 1 minus an allowance factor. The allowance factor is how much time is built into the day where the employee is not working. 2 15-minute breaks, for example. You are being paid, but you are not working. And so that is time paid but not worked. But there's some other non-productive time as well. Restroom breaks, just goofing off, not working. That needs to be built into this as well. And so that was the same thing. So the allowance time is break and other inefficient time. The break time was 30 minutes, and I've taken for this example another 15 minutes. So the allowance time is 30 plus 15, or 45 minutes. Now there are 480 minutes in an 8-hour workday. So if we divide 45 by 480, that's going to say that about 9.4% of our time that the employee is being paid, they're not working. And so that is our allowance factor. By subtracting the allowance factor from 1, we're going to get the percentage that the individuals were actually working. And so 1 minus 0.94 is 89.6%. So if we divide the standard time that we calculated at 117.2, divide it by 89.6, we come up with a standard time to do that task of 130.8 minutes. So what we're going to do in our schedule is we're going to allow 131 minutes to do the job. That is going to allow for any inefficiencies that are going to be there. It's going to allow for that 15-minute break. It's going to allow for any of the other things that can happen. So we can be relatively certain that that salad will be made in 131 minutes. And we just need to determine when that is going to happen. Now, we do exactly the same thing in other situations. And so now we're going to cut a cake, and we're going to cut, portion, and serve 150 customers this cake. So the first observation is 45 minutes, second observation 54, third observation 61. Rating factor now is 90% rather than 110%, and the allowance factor remains the same at 0.94. So what is the standard time to allow for this operation. Can you do that? So the first thing that we've got to do is to find the average time. And the average time is the sum of each of the observations. So it is 54 plus 45 plus 61 equals 160 divided by 3 is 53 1/3 minutes. Sorry. So that is the average time. We can multiply then that average time by the rating factor of, multiply that times 0.9. Ooh. So I've come up with 48 minutes. So it has worked just the opposite. We had an average of 53 1/3 minutes to do the task, but the observer said, you're not working to your fullest capacity. And so you're only working at 90%. And so by multiplying that by 0.9, we come up then with a real standard, a real normal time of 48 minutes. So that's going to be the basis of our calculation rather than the 53 1/3 minutes. Is that clear as to what's happening? Then if we divide that by 0.896, that is the percentage of work time, we're back to about 53 1/2 minutes, 53.57 minutes to do that task, based upon the observations that we have made. Many times when you take your car in to get it serviced, to replace a part, or to do some type of a repair, you will see posted, typically in the room where you go to make arrangements, what the rate is per labor hour. And so you take the car in at 8 o'clock in the morning and you pick it up at 4. They haven't worked on it all of that time. So you really haven't been there to see what's happening. But they have a standard time for every action that is taken on that car. So if you have an alternator replaced, there's a standard time for that. You pay based upon the standard time. You don't pay based upon what it actually took them. The standard time is often greater than the amount of time that they took to replace that alternator. So you are paying a higher rate to have that done. You would be better off, in some certain circumstances, to pay based upon the amount of time that they took to actually do the job. Several years ago, at Christmas time, we went to visit my sister. We had to drive over the Rocky Mountains, and it was cold. It was winter time. The heater was not working in our vehicle. And so we were cold as we were driving along. So I called ahead to my sister and I said, well, please make a reservation so that we can get this fixed while we're there. Our vehicle was in the garage for 3 days and they worked on it for 3 days. They were not able to resolve the problem. How much money did I have to pay to have my car repaired? It wasn't repaired, but they worked on it for 3 days. 8 hours a day times 3 days times their labor rate. I had to pay for some cleaning solvent that they used. I had to pay for some rags, and I had to pay for environmental handling of that so it wouldn't affect the environment. $10. Not much money for 3 days' work. because they didn't do anything. I mean, they tried to fix it, but they followed the standard time to do the job. They did not do the job, did not fix the problem, so I didn't have to pay. So in that case, I was helped by the standard time. But in food service, I think that we really need to establish these time standards and to use them for our determination of how much staff it's going to actually take us to do the job. So, you now have a methodology to do that. So that would be a great task for someone to do who doesn't have anything else to do. But I just thought that would make a wonderful graduate student project. Yeah.
How would you apply these in a real
How would I apply it? Yeah.
where you have maybe 60 recipes?
Yeah. That's exactly the problem that I'm trying to solve. I've got 60 recipes that have to be made, and how can I program each of those recipes to be made so that they all come out at the same time? So if I know how much time each of those recipes would take to make, that would help my scheduling issue evaporate. And that's...
Then practically you follow all of the 60 and work on that and you find that this is the way you've done it in the hospital.
That's what happens in industry, and in my opinion, food service is probably one of the most intensive industries that there is. You know, in making a car or making a locomotive or making something like that, I mean, it's a very definite process and the amount of time that it takes to put on each part. And so I can predict with a high degree of reliability when a project is going to be done, when I can deliver that locomotive, when I can deliver that airplane. But in terms of food, if I have a great deal of variability, primarily from the point of view that the employee can take as much time as they want to do the job, I really have lost control, and I need to regain that control through the use of some standardized times to do a task. So it will help me tremendously in my scheduling. So I can guarantee then that a project is going to be done on time.